Hey, Ty, we're a podcast all about rating things. So, how would you feel if you scored a 99 out of 100, a 95, a 98, and still missed out on Game of the Month?
Ooh, I feel like whoever's rating me needs a new system.
Right? Like something like multiple Game of the Months. Because this month, in this issue, we are in for a battle royale of some truly classic games.
You've got FunFactor, two old gamers reviewing old video game magazine reviews. I'm Ty Shalter, he's Aiden Moher, and we're two professional writers who grew up loving the video games and video game magazines of the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. Every episode, we take a critical look back on the games media that, for better and for worse, inspired us to do what we do. First, go to funfactorpod.com. Follow the show on your podcatcher of choice. Leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your media. We'll read the best, kindest, funniest, and most insightful ones on the air in our letters section. Please consider becoming a member of FunFactor Ultra, our premium tiers that unlock ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and the members-only channels of our Discord. Just go to funfactorpod.com and I promise you cannot miss it. Then, help us spread the word. Shout us out on Blue Sky at funfactorpod.com or anywhere else at FunFactorPod.
You know, Ty, as we've been recording this show, flipping back through all of these old magazines, I've been thinking a lot about how we consume games media. And I think that's becoming extremely relevant given, recent changes to the games media, landscape online. We're recording this just a couple of days after Polygon was sold to Valnet. Giant Bomb sort of imploded. And these were really high-end, video game sites driven by personalities that have earned reputations for being really smart, insightful, driven writers, like looking for stories within games, rather than just sort of looking for those PR opportunities to juice things up. Specifically, I've been thinking about the way we get information about upcoming games. It's so locked down by PR nowadays. Like even small indie games have PR companies driving communications.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Messaging is heavily dictated, which is such a far cry from the mid-90s when we were all desperate for any little snippet of new information or screenshots from an upcoming game, and we were digging through these magazines looking for it. Today we're looking at an issue of GameFan magazine, and for my money, it's the magazine that really put the fire under my feet by introducing me to games I never would have heard of otherwise. Like in this issue alone, we've got a 2-page review of Snatcher on the PlayStation, a big review of a Japanese exclusive pseudo-sequel to Sega's Zelda-like Crusader of Senti called Linkle River Story, although they've translated it as Wrinkle River Story, which I think is what happens when you spend too much time in the lazy river at the pool. And a preview of Wild Arms as well. There's a sprawling review of a game called Welcome House near the end of the magazine, which I'd never heard of. And I didn't remember until we were revisiting this magazine for this episode. It looks exactly like what you'd expect of a PlayStation take on Alone in the Dark, complete with rudimentary 3D graphics and the worst character designs this side of Nidhogg 2. It's such a deep cut that it doesn't even appear to have a Wikipedia page. But if you dig a little deeper, it turns out it's actually one of the earliest games from Gust, who are the creators of the extremely prolific Atelier series, the most recent of which, Atelier Yuma, came out in March of this year. And there's like a million games in that series. As you flip back all the way through the magazine, there are even like little tiny screenshots for Square's late SNES games, Treasure of the Rudrous and Treasure Hunter G, two games that still haven't ever seen an English release. You might call them lost treasures. Heyo. And this is all like a long-winded way of saying that GameFan specifically reminded me of how magazines allowed us to feel like we still experienced games we weren't able to buy because we didn't have the money or they weren't available here in North America. And it felt like GameFan was covering games nobody else was mentioning at the time. Did you ever play a game like way later in life after admiring it in a magazine?
Yeah, well, I've had some weird similar experiences. There's a couple that I want to go back and get to. And again, going back through this series has made me go, oh, all this stuff is just out there, right? In a way that it wasn't. Nobunaga's Ambition was one a Koei strategy game way back. It was available for NES, and I think it was released stateside, but I just physically could not find a copy. And so every game mag that I read talked about it. I'd see it in series. I'd see 2, I think 3 was for Super Nintendo. And every game store that I went into where I lived, they would just go, "What? Like, what are you talking about? You made that?" Like, they literally did not know that the game existed. They acted like I was crazy. I would try and explain. There's like factions and everything, you know. I would put it on my like Christmas list, and everyone would go like, "This doesn't exist. You're making this up," right? So that was one that was high on my list. I didn't go back and do that one. Some of the early emulators, you know, I was already in high school when like Z-SNES came out, like Nesticle. You know, there were some old ones that I could go back, and I started to try and play some of those that I saw in magazines and went, "Oh, I wanted to play that." And the experience just was not there, right? So I did not go back and re-experience that. But I'm doing this podcast with you, Aiden, and my backlog is like full of 80s and 90s stuff that I'm like, "Oh, I can just play that."
Yeah, and like the kind of technological leaps we've had through stuff like FPGA and software emulators allows us to have access to all of these games that just were never available. And I've been doing that since about 2017. I got heavily back into playing retro video games, and I've gone back to old favorites, but I've also searched out, a lot of those games that I was curious about but could never play back in the day. Like one of them was Crusader Ascenti. Another big one for me was Terranigma, which I like ogled over in magazines as a big Illusion of Gaia fan. But of course, it was never officially released in North America. It didn't come out here, but it did come out in English in Europe. And so in about 2017, I was like, I want to see if I still enjoy old pixel art RPGs. Like, do they still hold up? And so I was like, let's do Terranigma. I played it, loved it, like absolutely worth the wait. And I was like, oh yeah, these games absolutely hold up. And that was like the second game where I had this experience. The first one was, well, it's the game we're covering later in this episode, and I'm going to slow roll this even though everybody's already seen the episode title. But these two sort of like late generation Super Nintendo games are what convinced me that retro gaming still had all the juice. It wasn't a situation where like, oh, they were good at the time, but they don't hold up anymore. And that really put that fire under me, like I said, to like go back and explore all of these holes in my experience, because we're able to do that now.
Yeah, and something being part of the retro gaming community now, in a way, you know, you and I have talked, and I've gone back and dusted off I built an entertainment center for all my old console. I got my games back out. You know, I've been doing the retro gaming. But what's really been astonishing to me is how deep and wide the retro gaming community is and has been. Yeah. And even though I've carried that spirit with me, you know, I'm finding out every single day there's a whole new world of retro gaming stuff that I just wasn't even aware of. Getting out my Virtual Boy to use basically as a bit or a prop for this show has opened me up to this unbelievable world of Virtual Boy homebrews. I just found out there is a Street Fighter II port that uses the link cable. The link cable was never officially supported in the US. It didn't actually ever come out, but if you've got two Virtual Boys and a link cable, you can play a homebrew port of Super Street Fighter II Turbo, just called Hyper Fighting. You know, it's unbelievable to me how advanced and deep the scene is for something that I just held close to me personally and my experiences. And now I'm just thrilled to be able to go through this with you and with everybody listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And like on the Virtual Boy angle, it has one of the absolute like coolest FPGA like flash cards out there. Like, you know, I have one for a Nintendo 64. I have a Super Nintendo one. Friend of the show, Eric Lehman, was showing off his FPGA cart for the Virtual Boy, and it actually has like an e-ink display that shows the cover art for the game that you're playing. That was Virtual Boy, right?
Yeah, Virtual Boy.
Incredible stuff. And like to see the amount of like, you know, vision and engineering within this fan community that produces like a fairly niche product, which is a Virtual Boy FPGA cart, just shows how and why these games continue to be so important, and you know why we're doing the show that we're doing, because I think it's important to continue to recognize the impact that all of this has had.
All right, well, it is time to break open this issue of GameFan. and get past the really striking cover, extremely 90s cover. If you're not already a member of FunFactor Ultra, getting ad-free episodes, hang tight through the break. When we come back, we will flip through this magazine and the review that Aiden is slow rolling for us right here on FunFactor. Welcome back to Fun Factor, where two old gamers review old video game magazine reviews. Of course, we want you to review us. Do we get a full 5.0 in Fun Factor? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and we'll read the best, funniest, kindest, and most entertaining ones on the air.
Okay, so today we're looking at Volume 4, Issue 5 of GameFan magazine. It's from May 1996. It has 114 pages, so I would put that sort of like right in the kind of middle ground of magazines from this era. But the one thing that you'll notice as you flip through those 114 pages is it's not nearly as ad heavy as something like EGM was at the time. And so like volume of content, it was really like quite dense, which is nice. There's 23 games reviewed in this issue, plus one re-review of Night Warriors and one retro review of Phantasy Star, which is kind of cool. Number of systems reviewed for. They reviewed for the PlayStation, Saturn, 3DO, SNES, Genesis, 32X, and, remarkably, as mentioned, the Master System. So that's what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 systems. Notably, though, looking through this issue, one of the things that really stood out to me was GameFan didn't break their magazine down into like theme-based sections. Like previews, reviews, feature, RPGs, stuff like that. They broke it down by console. So you end up with, like after like the kind of opening spiel stuff with some capsule reviews and the editorial letter, you get PlayStation Nation, which is a mix of previews and reviews for PlayStation games. Just all bundled together. Like one page you might have a preview, then you have a review on the next page. Then you get to Saturn Sector, which is the same thing for Saturn games. 16-bit games, which are covered like, there's a few good ones in this magazine, in this issue, which we're going to talk about today. Those are all lumped together at the end without a cool name. As was semi-common at the time, sports games are sort of segregated into the GameFan sports section after everything else, so that people like me could just completely avoid it. The 3DO,
what?
represented by a single title. Hold on.
You like sports?
What? I like sports.
Did you not like sports games as a kid?
I liked sort of like, it just wasn't something we played, really, me and my friends.
All right.
Like, we would get into specific sports titles. We played Wayne Gretzky hockey on the Nintendo 64. My brother and I play a ton of ice hockey on the NES. But it was more just like if there was some, generally arcadey, video game sports titles we would kind of get into here and there, but for the most part it was not like a cultural like thing within my group of friends. We liked RPGs, was the big one,
sure,
fighting games, and then like FPS stuff like Nintendo 64 multiplayer games, stuff like that. But yeah, no, I didn't really play a lot of sports games, paid zero attention to them.
Yeah, well that was also my friend group, except I was the
fan,
sports game maniac. To where I had, Tecmo Super Bowl for NES, I had pen and paper, and I would basically manually franchise mode and go, okay, this was 1997, this is 1998, this is 1999, Amazing. This is 2000. Yeah. I had my like records for baseball stars, creative franchises and stuff. I was playing, franchise mode in my own head on pen and paper, and then, later I'd go to my friends' houses, and we would simply not play sports games because they thought I was a weird freak for enjoying the sports ball.
Yeah, I mean, which is fair. We had a great conversation on the Fun Factor Discord server, where two of our readers were talking about how they're in a relationship. I don't know their relationship status, but they know each other. They live together.
Yes.
And one of them got the other into baseball, like real life baseball, by describing it as like a turn-based sports game. And they were like, well, I like turn-based video games. So
Yeah.
that was how they kind of introduced them to sports. So there is, there is that commonality. There is, of course, that crossover. Sports games was just something that was never really a thing for me outside of random titles here and there. But yeah, that had its own section that I never looked at. And then there was a 3DO, which was represented by a single title, Brain Dead 13, which was like a, highly animated sort of, I guess, point and click adventure type game. It was actually like pretty nice looking. Like it looked like a cartoon. It was cool. 3DO did not get its own section. It was just lumped in with these 16-bit games.
Womp.
GameFan is very review and preview heavy. And that's one of the things that really kind of stood out to me, is they're really interested in diving into and providing lots of content on the games themselves. There's not a lot of like industry chatter in it compared to something like EGM or Game Players at the time. It was very, very invested in, just talking about games, experiences of playing games. As with all these magazines, the masthead for GameFan in this issue has some notable names. Kicking things off is publisher and editor-in-chief Dave Halverson, who's sporting a wicked mullet in his profile photo. And honestly, probably needs an entire special episode of FunFactor to explain his whole story, but the impact he had, positive and negative, on games media in the mid-90s was profound. And I think that's worth exploring. But again, not in this episode, or it'll run 3 hours.
Yeah, and I mean, the mullet,
associate
for
publisher,
those of you watching on YouTube, you can see
alone.
This is incredible.
Maybe we can dig out some old photos of Dave Halverson and his mullet and his his mop, because it was something else. But just underneath Dave was associate publisher Jay Puryear, and editorial staff included Kelly Rickards, Brian Lockhart, and Jason Weitzner. In a hardcore gaming 101 history of GameFan, Takui, which is the pen name for Casey Lowe, who we'll get to in a moment, said that even back then they were inundated by letters from basement-dwelling weirdos begging for photos of Kelly Rickards, because they all had crushes on, quote-unquote, her. But, well...
Oh, no.
In an interview, Casey, writing under the, name Takui, said, I would get at least one Postmeister letter a month asking us to, quote-unquote, run a picture of her, or talking about how great it was we had a girl writer, and what is she like, really, Lowe said. Admittedly, it's an unusual name for a guy, but her character clearly depicted a well-muscled man.
Incredible moment.
So there was such a desperate desire for this idea of this, unicorn girl woman writing about games, that Kelly Rickards adopted a strong, dedicated fan following of crushes who had no idea what they were getting themselves into. Casey Lowe was part of an editorial and layout team alongside Dave Halverson and Nick DeBerries, who is better known as Nick Rocks. Lowe was perhaps best known for working alongside DeBerries and legendary game localizer Jeremy Blaustein on many popular video games, including Suikoden 2, which you can learn much more about in a book I'm writing about that series, which is out in 2026 from Boss Fight Books. So keep an eye out for that. I go deep into their work on that game. Nick DeBerries, unfortunately, was arrested in January 2024, and he was charged with, quote-unquote, felony solicitation of a child by computer and first-degree sexual exploitation of a minor, as well as more than a dozen other felony charges. That's from a Time Extension article about the situation. I don't want to spend too much time on the details for obvious reasons, but the details and circumstances of his arrest and the charges against him and subsequent charges to other people connected to him is awful.
Yeah.
It's tragic. My, heart goes out to the victims. It's really hard to look at Nick Rocks' contributions to GameFan positively at this point, and it's not.
It taints it. For sure.
It's hard because I know it's really hard on the people who worked with Nick on GameFan, and it's something I don't think we can or need to dwell on too much right now. But it is something, as I looked back on this issue, and I was like, oh, I really want to do GameFan, and I started flipping through, and I was like, oh, how do I cover this? But of course, the work that everybody around everyone else at GameFan was doing was doing fantastic work, and I wanted to be able to highlight that. But it is something that I think is important to bring up because Nick DeBerry's had a strong impact on this magazine, was one of sort of the more prominent and recognizable figures from this era of GameFan. And, I hope that, whatever comes out of these charges and trials, that any victims can find, the healing and the help and the, future that they deserve.
For sure.
Famously, moving on, GameFan actually started life as a catalog for a local game store on Ventura Boulevard in Tarzana, California, called Die Hard. And so for a long time, the magazine itself was known as Die Hard GameFan, before eventually just kind of moving over to being known as GameFan specifically. It began life basically as a semi-professional fanzine, which gave GameFan like its really unique personality that I think comes through so strongly as you do a flip through of this magazine, and really helped separate it from the rest of the more rigid and traditional game magazines published by, media companies, stuff like EGM and Game Players and GamePro. And in many ways, I think, and this is what sort of why the conversation about Nick DeBerry is tough, but I think GameFan really helped catalyze the concept of personality-based games journalism. So every reviewer and like a preview writer, like staff writer basically, had a fantastic, like, unique portrait drawn of them in sort of like a fun style. So we're gonna look at reviews from Orion today, and their preview is like this sort of mad scientist with a big brain. Takui was sort of this mysterious martial artist. Waka was this cool guy with a backwards hat, and it really gave like that level of personality to them that a picture or a photograph didn't always convey. And that was fun. One of the people who worked at GameFan, not on this issue, but eventually, and had a big impact on the magazine, is a friend of the show, Molly Patterson.
Yeah, the reason she's a friend of the show is that she was our second ever bonus episode interview guest. If you want to learn all about producing GameFan, insides and outsides, ups and downs, all from Molly, who was there, plus everything she was there for EGM, just sign up for the FunFactor review crew at funfactorpod.com.
She has an interview in a time extension piece. It's like an oral history of GameFan, where she talks about her first days in the office. Can you read an excerpt from that, Ty?
Yeah. My first day in the offices, I was dumbfounded at how garage the whole organization felt. There was no consistency to the types of computers being used outside of mostly being Macs, and many of them were more out of date than I'd expected. The space was being rented in an office building in Agoura Hills, California. It was a total mess, feeling more like a college fraternity than a professional company. I really couldn't believe how that group of people could make a full and proper magazine every month under the circumstances. Once the shock wore off and I got into the swing of things, there were definitely bad parts, but there was far more good.
And I think that just speaks so highly to what the industry was like at the time. It was a lot of like really young people making these magazines, trying to figure out how to, make a go of it. And these answers weren't really solved in gaming. And you couldn't lean on older journalists or media people because they didn't have experience or understanding of video games. And so, Wild West is a cliche that's overused, but it really was kind of a Wild West. And it's pretty fun to see how all those same questions posed to various different game magazines were answered in different ways by each magazine, which then gave them each their own personality. And I think GameFan, like above and beyond every other game magazine, had the most distinct personality, for better or worse, I think, over time.
Yeah, and speaking of that, actually, Aiden, while I was researching for another upcoming episode, I found a letter to Next Generation asking them how they felt about all that racist bullshit getting printed in GameFan.
Huh.
And the editors responded, oh, hey, we know the diehard GameFan guys, they're great. Like, we know that's tough on them. I'm sure they'll figure out what happened. I'm paraphrasing here. I don't have the quote in front of me. But now I'm like on a mission to go track down exactly what this was, what happened. Didn't have to look that hard. From the Wikipedia page of GameFan magazine, controversy section, in the September 1995 issue of GameFan, an article was printed that contained several derogatory comments about Japanese people. GameFan's official explanation was that a rogue employee sabotaged the magazine in order to alienate its Japanese audience. However, later reports indicated it was actually filler text that someone had neglected to remove, and the entire incident was an internal joke that accidentally got printed. An apology dated August 24th, 1995 was published in Die Hard GameFan's October 1995 issue in both English and Japanese. That's the kind of thing that can happen when you have it's the Wild West, and you've got 19, 20, 23-year-olds writing and editing each other with little to no corporate oversight, let alone editorial mentorship from people who've had experience in an industry when this is games media, and there's almost no industry experience for anyone to have had.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, for better or worse, it can create really high highs, and I think there is a lot of that in GameFan. Like, I really do love it. Even as I was reading through this issue, there were a few things about, like, just the way that they would phrase comments about, like, Japanese creators or Japanese companies that I from the perspective of 2025, I'm like, oh, that's probably not really an okay way to frame that complaint or that criticism of these companies. And so I'm curious to see if you can dig out the source of that letter.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and get into the rest of this magazine. There's a ton of stuff to get to.
Yeah, let's do it. Today, we're looking at Volume 4, Issue 5 from May 1996. And I think it really exemplifies, like, how even deep into GameFan's run, it really retained that authentic fanzine feel. Like, it felt like and looked like something made by enthusiasts, just like at a far, far larger scale than other similar fanzines. On the cover, as you sort of mentioned earlier, it's got a huge, beautiful piece of key art from Legend of Oasis, which is a Saturn sequel to Beyond Oasis. It's bordered
I'm going to cut in real quick. I can't emphasize enough. This looks like I've played this game. I've never played this game. I've never even heard of this game. But it's so of the era and of the moment that it looks like every other killer JRPG being made at the time.
Absolutely. And it's like, it's a pretty good game. Beyond Oasis and Legend of Oasis. Like, one of the things that really sticks out about Legend in particular is it really leans into that art style, and the sprites on screen are gigantic. And it's an overhead sort of Zelda style, like, adventure game. But the sprites take up like a fifth of the screen. Like, they're humongous, and it kind of hurts the gameplay. But that art style that you see on the cover here, and it's got a really, like, kind of bright, vibrant, Disney-esque take on, like, I don't even know how you would describe that. Like, Arabian Nights in a tropical setting with genies and stuff. Like,
yes.
And that art style comes through in the game, like, brilliantly, and it's really beautiful. And there's lots of screenshots in this issue, and it looks like that, and it's a good looking game. And it's one of the ones that after I got a Saturn for the first time a few years ago, I like dove into, because I was always so curious to see how and if it could really hold up, like, to that style of presentation. Bordering the piece of key art is yellow text on a bright blue background, which is always a fantastic design choice.
Oh, yeah.
Detailing many of the games in the issue, previews, reviews, including Turok Dinosaur Hunter, Dark Savior, Snatcher, and, of course, because it wouldn't be a mid-90s game magazine without it, a big Final Fantasy VII feature.
If you saw me react a little while ago in, like, shame and disgust, it was because I had flipped ahead a little bit and saw they had labeled Barrett Bullet. Huge thing.
Yes.
Come on, guys.
yeah, absolutely. But it's also kind of showing, and I think we've seen this in other magazine, maybe PSM #1, maybe our first issue, where these were people, like, these magazines were kind of having to do, like, a lot of their own translation off preview material themselves. And so, like, Cloud, they have Cloud and Aerith, but yeah, Bullet for Barrett. Famously, like, within my friend group, there was once a preview of Final Fantasy VII. It wasn't this issue. I couldn't tell you what magazine it was, but they translated Cloud's name as Claude, Claud, which is like a real name. And so I had one friend who insisted, and would probably still insist, that Claude was a better name than Cloud. And, we'll go to the grave claiming that he should have been named Claude, all because of like a mistranslation.
Je m'appelle Claude Strife.
Yeah. If I can get you to flip to page 10 and 11, there's an ad there that immediately popped out at me for a few obvious reasons. Number one, it's the GameFan mascot, which is this like huge, hulking, but also somehow shapeless blue man with a CRT TV for a head. And he's like surrounded by more CRT TV screens with words like download, as 2 words, download, user-friendly and hot info emblazoned on them in like the most 90s way possible. It's an ad for GameFan Online, which is GameFan's website in mid-1996, which I think is just really forward-thinking and, you know, not something that you saw pushed by a lot of other magazines at this point. They call it the quote-unquote deepest video game site on the World Wide Web. I was heavily ingrained in like message boards and other online services at this time, but I'm not really sure I was going to like traditional websites. I wasn't going to GameFan.com for like games coverage. But what about you? Like by mid-1996, were you on the internet in that way?
I would have to go to my rich friend's house who had all the cool stuff, because he, of course, also had multiple computers. And one of us actually convinced my rich friend's parents to get a T1 line run to their house. Or not T1, T3. Right. Sorry. T1 was like a huge business class. I mean, T3 was still business class. But he ended up convincing them that they needed this T3, which was still like a wild amount of internet. But we didn't get that until I think we were almost out of high school, maybe already out of high school. So we were all taking turns sharing a couple of phone lines and a couple of computers, trying to run this stuff. But I was very active on the Next Generation forums, actually. Next Generation's website was like the like the magazine, very modern, forward thinking, trying to be super cool. And I also access it very heavily at my school's library, especially when I wasn't supposed to be.
It was definitely like not long after this that I got online, because I remember, you know, like reading about Final Fantasy IX and Chrono Cross and stuff on, you know, the GIA, the Gaming Intelligence Agency and stuff. And that, you know, that would have all been like 1999. But I don't think in 1996, I was doing a lot of like LAN parties with friends playing Warcraft and Doom and Quake and stuff. But, you know, I was on bulletin boards and message boards, but not really looking at websites, which is funny because I'm, you know, I work in web now.
Right. There wasn't much. Like we looked at a recent episode. You know, a lot of stuff was still one-person projects of college kids that were getting free hosting space. Hosting space was unbelievably tough to come by. A lot of game magazines that were putting content online were putting it, you know, secondarily. And again, Next Generation like mostly existed as forums. I think they had, you know, it was styled the same way as the site, but it was not a bonanza of content in any way, shape, or form.
I was definitely like, my first experiences would have been like outside of like Final Fantasy message boards would have been like Icy Brian's and Zophar's Domain. I was obviously like, you know, I remember printing off a Super Mario RPG walkthrough, or not even a walkthrough, just a world map on my like dot matrix printer at the time. Printed off like a character recruitment guide for Suikoden 1. So that would have been like 97 or so. So definitely this was around the time that I started to get like more heavily online in those ways. After this ad, we have a section called Viewpoint, which is the capsule reviews for this issue. And so this is an EGM style format of having multiple reviewers provide an opinion and a score for a bunch of different titles across a 2-page spread. They rank games out of 100, like an overall score out of 100. They also break it down into categories of graphics, control, play mechanics, music, and originality. So each game is marked out of 100 on marked out of 10 on those, 100 overall. I can't really tell if there's like a weighted average that leads to the overall score, or if it's just like, they don't explain. The way that other magazines sort of explained, like Game Players explained how each of their categories was weighted, and then a final score was taken from that. We have about 11 reviews, or 11 games reviewed, 3 reviewers each.
I like the butterfly ballot style layout for maximum confusion. So, for example, we have Rise to Resurrection,
Yes.
the sequel to the horrible fighting game Rise of the Robots, if I remember correctly. Also
Yeah,
very
that's
horrible.
correct. Yep.
Getting scores of 40, 35, 56, 99, 95, 90. Wait, what? Oh, Super Mario RPG.
Yeah, right.
On the right hand side.
Yeah. Speaking of Super Mario RPG, it is a standout this month, and it is the game that got a 99, a 95, a 98 out of 100,
yes.
and did not manage to snag Game of the Month. That went to Panzer Dragoons Y. For the Saturn, it got a 99, a 98, and a 99. It is a very good game. Those are very good scores.
Yeah.
I personally like Super Mario RPG a bit more, but I'm not a big rail shooter fan. But Panzer Dragoons Y, I think, is a very reasonable Game of the Month choice there. And Super Mario RPG, just in tough against another classic game.
Got robbed.
And then there's another standout Super Nintendo RPG, which we're going to talk about later in this issue, which got a 90, a 90, and a 90, triple 90s. But we'll get to that soon. Can you flip like just to the next page or 2 pages down? There's this beautiful, stunning preview of Turok Dinosaur Hunter for the Nintendo 64. I need you, Ty. I need you to paint a word picture here. And just explain how remarkable and transcendent and beautiful this preview looks.
Yeah. Okay. So right about this time, there's a department store called Mervin's, and there was this T-shirt that they had with some logo. I don't remember what the brand was. A very short-lived brand. Just had kind of like a futuristic name, like a 2-word name, and then it had a little skull on fire between it, and that was like embroidered on. And then there were the same shirt in 3 different colors, really comfortable T-shirt, and it was like a gray blue, a gray green brown, and like a gray green gray. And one time, my mom, in a fit of anger at the pile of laundry that I had in my room, described them as mung-colored shirts. And that is what is happening on this page. The entire page is just slathered in mung.
Incredible.
It is almost impossible to distinguish between. And brilliantly, they went ahead and used like a pixely gray-green background for it. So just in case you had any hope of getting some saturated colors or distinct visual clarity or non-foggy objects, that is wiped out by the background being just as mung-colored as the rest of it.
Incredible. And then, like, my 2 favorite things, aside from everything you just described, is in the top left above the logo for the game, there's a Nintendo 64 and a cartridge. And it kind of looked like the cartridge is sort of hovering above it, but they've used this like Photoshoppy blur effect to make it look like the cartridge is like slamming down from above into it. And it just looks so good. And you can tell it's one of those things that it was probably like 2 a.m. when they were like knocking this together and somebody was like, oh yeah, look at this. This looks sick. It looks like the cartridge is just like slamming into the console. Even though like the angle is totally off, like the cart would not slide into the cartridge.
Oh yeah,
slot
yeah, it's great. It's like a side
and then further down there's
trying to descend into a isometric, like 3/4 view of the. Oh my god!
Exactly. And the cartridge is like slightly too small.
Incredible
for the cartridge slot as well. And the Nintendo 64 is turned on. So good. This is a very image heavy preview. It's a single page, and there's like.
Oh yeah.
Like what, 1836 screenshots? And it's cool. Like this is stuff that GameFan probably was capturing themselves somehow. Like, they're not good screenshots, right? These are not like what we're used to in 2025 for preview screenshots, which are like perfectly framed, beautiful, pieces of art. These are like screenshots in the game that somebody took from some tech demo somewhere. And, I can appreciate it from that angle because there was probably a lot of work that went into this.
There was, in fact, a ton of work that went into this. Again, please listen to the Molly Patterson bonus episode. Subscribe to the FunFactor Ultra Review crew. Listen, give us money, enjoy more incredible content. Please, thank you. Okay, back to the show.
And there's a lot of it's showing off a lot of the enemy variety. It's, it's showing off these environments, but they're very samey. 3 of the screenshots, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the screenshots are the same enemy, just from like slightly.
It literally
different
looks like it
angles.
was took like in like a burst. Like, cool, take a picture, take a picture, take a picture, take a great. Yeah, run all of them. Run all of them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And it says like, and I mean, like, this is something else too. It says all these characters are only between 30 and 40% complete. These characters animate unbelievably smoothly. So like, this is a really early build. We don't get to see this stuff from video games anymore. So, you know, on first glance, this whole preview looks a little stodgy, a little bland. But when you recognize it, you're actually getting to see sort of assets that would never make it to the light of day now. It's pretty neat. I also, though, in some of the copy near the bottom of the page, it says, quote unquote, as promised, the N64 produces pixel-free environments. And I just like absolutely love the way that they're bragging about the Nintendo 64 offering quote unquote pixel-free environments, as though like all the pixel art games in this issue haven't aged like far better than Turok. Like, we're talking like some beautiful pixel art games, which are very pixely but still look amazing, and Turok does not. And it's just funny how hard we were pushing into 3D tech that like really wasn't mature enough at the time to really pull off, you know, like our impressive visuals outside of being like, oh wow, I've never seen this before. But the idea that this was like that getting rid of pixels was some sort of win instead of some sort of compromise is pretty funny. Okay, before we get to the good stuff, we're going to flip. We've been at the beginning of the magazine. We're going to flip all the way to the back of the magazine. Because to me, this is like the real meat and bones of GameFan. And I kind of alluded to it earlier, but this is the ad section where it was loaded not with like, you know, traditional ads bought by publishers of specific video games, but like these are ads from game shops around the United States, loaded. Yeah. Including Die Hard, because of course GameFan started life as a catalog for a game store. But they're loaded with like ready to order imports. So you have games like Albert Odyssey on the Sega Saturn for $90, a cool $100 for a Japanese copy of Bahamut Lagoon on the Super Nintendo, and then $110 for King of Fighters 95. Which is just like, you know, there's so much conversation right now about like, you know, game prices going to $80 US and stuff. And, you know, if you were in the import scene back then, $110, King of Fighters, 95, $90 for...
We will not be undersold. CODs are welcome. Yeah. And I just want you to think about, just imagine, this is the May 1996 issue. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to call this 818 number. You're paying long distance, by the way, kids. You had your landline and you're going to get charged. This is going to show up on your mom and dad's long distance bill as like a $4 phone call. It's not a toll-free number. The 818 number, you're going to call Die Hard Gamers Club. You're going to go, I want to play King of Fighters 95. I'm going to pay your $109.99 plus tax, presumably plus shipping. And send that COD, which means cash on delivery, which means in some number of weeks, someone will show up on your doorstep and they're going to be like, okay, great. Please hand me like $122 in cash. And then if you do, you get your game.
Hey, to be fair,
the chain of things happening here is unbelievable.
To be fair, they do promise overnight delivery, which is wild and must have cost a fortune. So you do know it should theoretically show up the next day. I don't know how that's possible, but it's there. It's the promise. But speaking of that, you know, long distance phone number, there's also the aforementioned quote unquote secret treasure of Ludra, which nowadays is more commonly translated as Treasure of the Rudras, which is on the Super NES. It's like a late gen Squaresoft RPG, and it's awesome. It's there alongside Treasure Hunter G. They wouldn't even list the price in this ad. So you had to call that number. Again, long distance, you're paying money for it. Your parents are going to get mad just to find out how ludicrously expensive these Super Nintendo carts were. Like, if they're listing 110 for King of Fighters, you got to be looking at 120.
Oh, yeah.
Like, bottom
We also hear, Aiden, special collectible offer, imported resin kits from Japan, limited quantities, call for prices. This Felicia from Darkstalkers, I do not even want to know how much it would have cost you then, let alone what that figurine must be worth now on the secondary market. If you have a 1995 Felicia from Darkstalkers, I mean, go in there. There's Cammy, E Honda, this whole group. Something that was only available in Japan probably had to be smuggled out of the country overnight, overseas shipping to Die Hard Gamers Club, and then there's probably 5 of these things on the continent, and you're gonna call them and ask for their price.
Yeah, those are beautiful though.
Yeah,
and like you said, the resale on them's probably kind of crazy. The other crazy thing here is you can get a Saturn for $269.99, a white Japanese Saturn.
All import RPGs
cool.
include free translation, Aiden. I'm sure this is equally high quality. It's right above there, available now from Japan.
Yeah.
All import RPGs. Just amazing. Who's doing this translation?
Dot matrix printed out sheets. There is, however, quite a killer deal. Monthly import Saturn blowouts. Only $14.99 for Street Fighter II, the movie, the game. A classic. Stone cold classic right there. So, I talked earlier about how like these magazines really let us feel like we experienced or knew about or were in on games, like even if we didn't get to order them or play them. And these
100%.
like these previews and these like ads at the back are a huge part of that for me. Like I looked at these screenshots for like so long and just dreamed about having these games.
Oh,
one of the funny things though is like I think that like I look at this ad, and this is from Die Hard, so the magazine that like published Game, or the store that published GameFan, but they have an ad down near the bottom for Thor on the Saturn, but that is Legend of Oasis. So it's weird how they have a whole preview of the game, but then have it translated as a different translation and title in the ad at the end. And the same thing, like they have a picture of a Nintendo 64. It straight up says Nintendo 64 on the console, but the ad says pre-order your Ultra today. So it's interesting to see how like, these ads were probably being put together by somebody else that wasn't maybe deeply involved in the magazine itself.
Wow.
But yeah, anyway, cool stuff. Like there are so many games now that I've sought out, like, fan translations for, like Treasure of the Rudress, Treasure Hunter G, because I saw them in the back of these magazines. And like, in particular, like I talked about Terranigma earlier in this episode, there is one specific screenshot from the back of a GameFan magazine that like haunted me for my whole life until I could finally play that game. And then I got to that part in Terranigma a couple hours in. I was like, oh, this is it. This is the scene from that game that I wanted to play all those years ago. And that was a cool feeling. Before we move on, there's one last screenshot I want to point out on this ad. It is for the Nintendo 64. You see a screenshot of Super Mario 64 below it. Right above that is a screenshot of Wave Race 64 before it was a jet ski game, which I think is pretty cool.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's like, you look like you're racing in these kind of funky hoverboat things. And that is Wave Race 64 before they turned it into a jet ski game, which is pretty
That
nice.
is super cool. Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay. These were like obviously far out of my price range. Like I said, I ogled these. I never bought any, especially after doing, shipping, duties, currency exchange to Canada. It would I can't even imagine how much they would have cost. I eventually started importing games here and there. I imported like Children of Mana and Phoenix Wright game and stuff, but that wasn't until like the Nintendo DS era. Did you ever import anything?
No, me and my friends were less ethical. So our main way of getting games that we wanted to play but couldn't was through shady online websites. Also, we had now these of course were US release, but we also loved renting games and then
I rented
copying them. Yeah. So that was mostly we were getting our fair share of games that way. But I definitely desperately wanted to import a lot of these games that just weren't available here.
Absolutely. Or like, and then every once in a while I might go into a game store and see one of them and they'd be $160 or whatever.
Behind glass.
Behind glass. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I mean, like, to me, GameFan really was about like this deep fan culture within gaming, and that's what kind of came together to create GameFan. And I really appreciate it for that. And it's, you know, I'm really excited to continue to explore how it was engaging with games culture and games media and the games industry compared to the more traditional, like, games media company funded magazines as well.
And we are going to engage with games media, very specifically this games media, and the media this games media was engaging with the game Aiden has teased this whole time, Lufia II, which you already knew because it is in the episode title right here when we get back on FunFactor. Welcome back to FunFactor, where two old gamers review old video game magazine reviews. That is what we are going to do right now. It is time for us to review the review.
As I mentioned earlier, one of the interesting things about GameFan is the review format, and it's unique against other magazines at the time because it kind of combines the two prominent styles. As I said, it has capsule style reviews near the beginning, touching on about a dozen different reviews, and those come with 100-point scale review, like score and category scores. But then also scattershot throughout the whole magazine are expanded editorial style reviews. So if the capsule reviews are like EGM, the longer reviews are like game players. And these ones are like just throughout the magazine. They might be beside a preview, like I mentioned earlier, but notably, they don't have a score attached. And so I like to really look at this as a clever balance between sort of the consumer-oriented approach of reviews, like the capsule reviews, and like more like comprehensive criticism that wants to look at the game and what it does and what's interesting about it, what doesn't work, without being concerned about whether or not a reader is going to buy it or not. What do you think of this?
Yeah, no,
like kind
that's
of doing
fascinating. That's fascinating, and especially reviews, as you say, from a game magazine that is born out of a game shop, right? Where like, and they still have ads for their own game shop in the magazine. That consumerism is like tied so hard, and they have, you know, the capsule reviews earlier with the multi-panel scores, score out of 100, you know, and then as you say, it's this big splashy 2-page layout, tons of screenshots, and then, you know, really good long editorial review and no score. And that's, you know, it's ahead of its time. It's what we love nowadays in a lot of our favorite sites. They don't put in a score because they don't want to participate in the Metacritic game. They don't want to tie it to consumerism. And that's fascinating to have that side by side with, you know, even like the most direct pandering to sales type reviews.
Yeah, like literally at the back they have for sale from their shop a bunch of the games they reviewed in this issue, right? Like, so it is in their best interest to try to get you to go to the back and pay $90.
If there was an Amazon affiliate link, it would be at the bottom of this review.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the fact that, you know, like you say, the fact that they have both of those, despite the consumer-oriented nature of their business, shows just that enthusiasm to want to write deeply about games. You know, we'll get into the capsule reviews. We're going to get into the full review as well, and we'll look and see how well they both sort of serve that purpose. But I also want to talk about the game we're looking at today, which is one of my favorite RPGs on the Super NES, which is like, you know, high praise because the Super NES has some of the best RPGs of all time. Like you said, Lufia II, Rise of the Sinistrals is what we're looking at today. And it's a game that I played the original Lufia back in the day, or mostly played it at my friend's house while he played through it. And dipped my toes into Lufia II a little bit here and there, but I didn't really discover it and come to appreciate it for what it is until several years ago, when it was the first game I completed after getting back into like quote-unquote retro gaming via emulators. I wanted to see, like I said, if pixel art, 16-bit RPGs still held up. And so I picked one of the best, which was Lufia 2. And of course, as I said, it's gone on to become one of my most favorite RPGs of all time. And I think the reviews we go through today are going to touch on a few of the reasons why it managed to do that. So let's take a look at the reviews, because in GameFan, there's multiple reviews of this. We're going to look at and start with the capsule reviews, which are at the front of the magazine. And we've got, opinions from Orion, Waka, and Takuhi. One of the things, that I thought was cute was that Lufia 2 is infamous for its poor localization. So it's a fabulous game, but it got a, very bad localization in English. We were lucky to get it in English. It's playable, it's fine, but you can tell that we're not getting the best experience from it. And so when I saw Takui on the review, which is a pen name for Casey Lowe, I kind of had a chuckle because Casey, as part of the Suikoden 2 localization team, is responsible for another one of these absolutely classic Japanese RPGs that has always been held back by its very poor localization. And not to shill my book too much, but I have written a book about Suikoden and Suikoden 2, and I have a big long chapter about like what went wrong with that localization. And I speak with Casey and I speak with Jeremy Blaustein about why such a talented group of translators put out a product that is known to be one of these sort of most compromised localizations out there. And so it's just kind of funny to make that connection for me in this review, in this capsule review, because Casey would go on to, Suikoden 2 came out only a few years after this. It was 3 years later. So it wouldn't be long past this issue that Casey started working on game localization. But in any case, Ty.
Yes.
Can you kick things off by reading Orion's review of Lufia 2?
Look! A good RPG! In English! I know, kind of shocking, but it's true. Once you get over the fact that there's English in the text boxes, you'll notice Lufia 2 has a very strong storyline, even better for the folks who played the original Lufia. Clean and colorful graphics, cool puzzles, and a great soundtrack. This is easily the most enjoyable RPG I've played on my SNES in a long while. Now let's just start getting some of those great 32-bit titles over here.
And Orion gave it a 90 overall.
Yes. I forgot to play. 90 overall, and then we have G, C, P, M, and O for graphics, other things. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Orion, obviously has no idea. This is May 1996, but they're going to get their wish, tenfold within the next year as Final Fantasy VII hits the PlayStation, and then the entire genre explodes. I do think it's interesting to see, in this publication, in a magazine, again, that is published by a store that wants to sell these import games, a real emphasis on hey, there are tons of good RPGs out there, we're just not getting them, which was true. There were so many that were being left behind in this weird transitional period between the 16-bit and the 32-bit era, and I'm just really glad that Lufia 2 got that chance. Next up, we have Tukui's review, and they say, after all these years of begging and pleading in vain for companies like Square and Enix to meet their RPG responsibilities, Jaleco just comes up and says, here's Lufia 2, comes out tomorrow. Wow! While Lufia 2 wouldn't have been my number one choice for an American conversion, this is an excellent game. The battles get a bit tedious, but the storyline, music, and puzzle dungeons are all really cool. Lufia 2 makes me really happy. And Takui gave it a 90 overall. And I think it really, again, illustrates how desperate console fans were for RPGs at the time.
Yeah.
Myself chief among them. Half this review is just being hey, holy smokes, somebody put out an RPG, which is kind of crazy. It doesn't even talk about the quality of the game, which I thought was interesting.
That's a good point.
Can you read, let's go to the final capsule review. This is from Waka, who continued the trend, another 90, so 3 90s across the board.
Yeah, Jaleco is very wise to bring out this title. This game's been rated as one of Japan's favorite RPGs for over a year. The music, puzzles, which are most intriguing, storyline, and anything else you can think of are all new and improved. L2 is put together very well. With games like this, Super Mario RPG, and more coming, 96 is shaping up to be yet another promising year for 16-bit role-playing fans. Very interesting justification on this, like in terms of the actual text. Some of the formatting here is just very strange. It's like they had a fixed number of words that could go in the box, you know, and then they're just like sizing and and downsizing to fill the whole box. It's very funny.
It's so good. And I also like how, like, you know, in Waka's review, they refer to it as L2, like an acronym, but then it's Lufia II in other reviews. Like, there's no consistency across the naming conventions, which is always funny, and I think does maybe speak a little bit more to the, you know, semi-pro background of the magazine. I also thought it was really weird.
Is Waka? Do you know if this is like a Persona type thing? Because that almost had the sort of stilted in translation. You know, Jaleeko is very wise to bring out this title. This game's been, with an exclamation point. This game's been rated as one of Japan's favorite RPGs for over a year! Exclamation point. It almost sounds like I don't know if it's English as second language, or like, I don't know if they're doing a bit, you know, but just like, honestly, pretty like stilted, awkward phrasing for an English language magazine.
I think it's just the quality of the writing of the magazine.
Yeah.
Okay. Waka's,
all right. Just
Waka's
checking.
name was Mike Wakamatsu. So that's all I really know about Mike. But I do think that, like, capsule reviews, especially of this time, like, did get into some. I don't think that, like, short form, concise criticism was necessarily a strength of a lot of the young writers who were working at this time, as much as it would kind of come to become something that was a strength of the industry. But I did think it was
and I have to, in defense of myself, also keep in mind all of these, if you're not looking at the visual version, all of these are like wild ass cartoon characters. Yes. Like, they look like they are in-set dialogue in a video game with weird stereotypes and exaggerated proportions and everything. So it's like, I don't know if these are characters doing a bit or just how these people are writing.
Well, and like in other magazines, we got stuff like Sushi X, which was a bit. And, you know, we did absolutely have people writing in character rather than, like, you know, as themselves. And it can be hard to tell, especially looking back, whether or not that was what was happening here. But I think it was just somebody who was really excited about RPGs. It's funny to me, though, that, like, Waka's opinion about RPGs at the time was totally different. You know, well, Orion and Takui were both talking about how, like, oh my gosh, an RPG on the Super Nintendo. Waka's like, oh, it's been a really good year for Super Nintendo 16-bit role-playing game fans, which is basically counter to what the other two are saying.
Yet another promising year.
And another promising year. Yeah. So I don't know. Interesting. Perspective was so different, right? Like, he might have just found maybe he really liked Secret of Evermore or something. And so that just, like, you know, kind of set a tone for that year more than the others or something like that. But we're going to flip forward to page 62, which is where we have a really beefy 2-page spread for a full review of Lufia II by Orion. So Orion did both a capsule review and then a full-on editorial style review, which I think is interesting. Like, I like that they kind of give their writers both opportunities to write in both spaces, and it's interesting to see how some of the concise ideas in the capsule review are expanded upon in the full review. Here we have, again, a 2-page spread. It's, like, loaded with screenshots. They look really good too. Like, it's really, like, crisp and clear and colorful. The layout's nice and simple.
Yeah.
They're all bordered by what, you know, might almost looks like a text border in a 16-bit RPG, you know, and some of them are at a slant, but, you know, it just looks really good. It's an aesthetically pleasing set of pages. The background is all overlaid with some transparency over top of a background from the intro to Lufia II. It's got that vibe that all these mid-90s video game magazines have, but without feeling like it's, like, losing readability. The text is a little small, like, you know, it squeezes a lot of characters into a fairly small area of space. Yeah. So, you know, it might be a little hard to read, but otherwise, like, I feel like it looks pretty good.
No, it looks great. I totally agree. And it is funny that they actually have this very RPG-like border that you called out like a fancy text box in an RPG, but Lufia 2 does not have that. It's just blue with the white rounded box backgrounds of Final Fantasy style. But they clearly put a ton into making this review look good, and it shows.
Yeah, absolutely, it shows. And then, I mean, the next page, or previous one page, you have Super Mario RPG. A review as well, and it has something similar. It has all the screenshots, but they're bordered by like the Mario pipes. It also looks really good. So they were doing, like some bespoke artwork for these reviews, which I think really makes it like helps it stand out, and gives flavor to each game. Orion's review is, like I said, it's pretty dense and meaty. It touches on a lot of the various different parts of the game that work, but it's specifically focused on sort of how it does everything better than its prequel, Lufia 1. The review kicks off with a story summary, placing Lufia 2 100 years before the first game, so it's a prequel that deals with a lot of events that shape the plot of the first game. And also, like I said, contextualizes how Lufia 2 took a fairly standard, like bog standard, mediocre Super Nintendo RPG and just made every single facet better. And turned something that was sort of middling into like genuinely one of the best games on the console with Lufia 2. Once you get past those first couple of paragraphs, you get into the meat of the review, and this is where Orion's praise starts to kick in for the game's look and feel in particular. And so I'm going to read a quote here from Orion, where he says, "The graphics, they're, well, amazing. Everything's gone through a complete overhaul, from the characters, who are a bit less squashed and a lot cleaner, to the overworld map itself. The improvements made in towns and castles are almost indescribable. Not only do the houses finally have a roof, for some reason these were left off in the first Lufia, but everything was packed with color and detail. Even the fight scenes, which in the original were these painfully cheap-looking battles where your enemies just appeared above you, have been changed into great-looking isometric view battlegrounds." So Ty, before I start like gushing over Lufia 2 in the way that Orion does in this review, do you have any experience playing the game? Or with the game?
Actually, I don't. And it's definitely one that I've thought about going back and playing through. I remember the ads for it coming out and thinking it looked pretty good. But again, I just gotten hooked on Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI. And by 1996, I had a PlayStation. And so I was like going, okay, this doesn't look good enough to go make a point of going and spending $60 or whatever on it at the time. And then I also had a weird, even though the Final Fantasy games were not like this, enough sequels were coming out that I was like, oh, well, if it's a story-based game, I'm going to want to play the first one. Even though that you do not need to play Lufia 1 to play Lufia 2, I don't think. So, weird decisions you make as a 14, 15-year-old.
And I mean, we were always making those decisions, right? Like, a huge part of like growing up as an adolescent during this golden age was like our experiences, our path through like video games or RPGs was shaped by the decisions we made, right? I didn't play Lufia 2 at the same time for many of the same reasons. Like I was super into Chrono Trigger and the PlayStation was coming and stuff, and it just kind of slipped me by, despite, enjoying the first one well enough. One of my favorite games in like a really weird way is there's a Lufia 2 remake on the Nintendo DS, and it takes Lufia 2 but then turns it into like a third person action RPG. So like it doesn't have random battles, it's not turn-based battles, but it also like modernizes everything. So like Maxim, who is the main character, is wearing like a cool leather jacket, and there's like a lot of science elements in the game. It's like it's really strange. It's like a re-envisioning of Lufia 2. It's very, very different. It follows the broad sweeps of the story in the same way, but it's just such a weird thing to go in and play this game and be like, yeah, this is Lufia 2. It's just not at all like Lufia 2. But it's also, I really liked it. I got about halfway through it and finish it, but I really appreciated that experience of finding something that's so vastly different from its source, but still felt like interesting and like true to itself in its own way. So if anyone likes Lufia 2, find that Nintendo DS remake and give it a shot. It's really interesting. Anyway, tangent aside about remakes, can you read this next little bit of the review? Because I think it hits on the heart of what makes Lufia 2 so special in sort of the pantheon of Japanese RPGs in that 16-bit era.
But the best change by far lies in the caves and dungeons. Though not much different from the original Lufia in appearance, they've been totally redesigned to add an entirely new element to the game. Enemies still attack randomly on the overworld map, but now battles in caves and underground locations are almost like Chrono Trigger. The creatures are visible, but if they touch you, a standard fight begins. This was done so random attacks wouldn't be a problem as you fool around with the new Zelda-type attributes found here. There are blocks to move, switches to throw, cracked walls to blow open, as well as many puzzles to solve. This is quickly becoming my favorite part of Lufia 2. Some of these puzzles are extremely well designed, and a blast to figure out.
Yeah, so like Lufia 2 has a lot of really interesting elements to it that blends genre and like also kind of set the stage for stuff to come. For one thing, the battles, the enemies appear on screen in dungeons, but it's not like Chrono Trigger where you fight on the actual like dungeon like layout. You still go into like a random battle screen.
Okay.
But it kind of takes on almost a roguelike element because it has grid-based movement, so every map is a grid. Enemies don't move unless you move. And so every time you make a move, they make a move, like roguelikes work out. So there are instances in the dungeon where you might need to stop and think something through and try to figure out how you can maybe manipulate, the space, how the enemies are moving through the space. Maybe you're low on resources or hit points and you want to try to get through a room without getting into battle. How can you stop that from happening? That I think is just kind of really makes for a really interesting and unique pace to playing Lufia 2. It's really a game that encourages you, because it's then also full of puzzles, to stop and look at what's happening on screen, not just rip through dungeons as fast as you can. And that just plays like unlike any other RPG at the time, I think. And as they touch upon, there is sort of these Zelda-style tools in the game that allow you to interact with the environment that are so heavily baked into like the puzzle element of Lufia dungeon design. And there's so many puzzles that really, like, I think if you didn't have Lufia 2, you wouldn't have gone on and had Wild Arms, which takes on the same idea. And any of these sort of like heavily puzzle-based RPGs that we've seen since 1996 all kind of come back to Lufia 2. And being able to like go into again like a game where moving through the environment and solving environmental puzzles is like such a huge part of the experience, was so different than what like Square Enix, or I guess Squaresoft at the time, was doing with Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy. And that's why I want everyone to go back and play Lufia 2. It just feels like a very confident, well executed idea of a different way you can do an RPG. And then on top of all of that, they have like a full on 100 level like actual roguelike mini game where you can do like 100 floor like roguelike where you start over from scratch and you have to build up as you go on. It's like, it's amazing. It's like if it was released as a standalone game, it would be worth playing and putting tons of time into. The fact that it's sort of like a semi-hidden dungeon in Lufia 2 is remarkable.
Yeah, that sounds outstanding. That's really, really cool.
It's worth going back to. Like I said, it reinvigorated my idea of like how fun retro games could be and how they can stand up and feel unique even playing them, 25, almost 30 years later. Orion wraps up his review with a lot of praise. The whole review is very like, positive, and is obviously a big fan of the game, and highlights, in my opinion, a lot of the things that the game does well and still continues to do well. It looks really beautiful. The pixel art graphics are incredible. It looks so good on my CRT TVs upstairs. The battles, the environments, everything about it just looks really nice, and those puzzle elements are so strong. Orion says, to wrap up the review, Lufia 2 did tremendously well in Japan, holding a place in the top 5 of the Super Famicom readers' all-time favorite game list for over a year. And thankfully, it finally made it to our shores. See, some Japanese companies care. Now, if we could only get Tales of Fantasia, Genso Suikoden, Romancing Saga 3, then I'd truly be a happy man. And of course, we would end up getting all 3 of those games on Western shores. Some of them would take a lot longer than others, but Tales of Fantasia hit North America on the Game Boy Advance several years later. Against the Suikoden obviously came out 1997, a year after this review was made, and Romancing Saga 3, I think, saw its first official English release on like the PlayStation 4, like within the last like 5 years or so, as Square has been inexplicably re-releasing all the Saga games. So, like eventually we got there, and I think Final Fantasy VII, as we've talked about a lot, really changed the arithmetic for a lot of these games.
Yeah, and it's funny, Aiden, while you've been talking, I've kind of gone back and gone like, what was I doing? I said I had a PlayStation at the time, but like I'm trying to throw myself back and going like, why am I missing a game like this just because it didn't look like, Chrono Trigger, as, it couldn't go 1-to-1 with Chrono Trigger for graphics, right? Like it's still very, very cool.
Ty, you were wasting time on all those sports games. I hate to break it.
Yes. Yeah, well, sports games, because I'm looking at it, it's all right, cool. There's Wipeout, there's Warhawk, there's all these games, but even then, I was desperately waiting for really an itch that wouldn't get scratched until Final Fantasy VII, where I was going, show me 32-bit RPGs, like take this forward from here, right? Like if you can do Chrono Trigger, if you can do Final Fantasy VI, show me what's next, right? And so I was hanging on any PlayStation RPG and just Beyond the Beyond.
Oh yeah.
Which is one of the most frustrating experiences of all time as a gamer. I'm sure I'll get into that at some point. I'm looking at Jade Cocoon. There's like a bunch of these games that were like C- to D+ RPGs getting localized, and like that's what I'm on, going like please, and then I'm not looking at Lufia II. I'm like, that's 16-bit, whatever. Can't be that good.
Well, and it's that trap of that transitional era, right? Like where you're wanting something that justifies your purchase of the PlayStation, like stuff like that. But this was also like a transitional time for us as millennials, right? Like we were growing up, and like I was into video games, but by 1996 I was also getting heavily into Magic the Gathering. We were starting to get into Warhammer. I was getting into beer and vodka and just parties, right? Like there was a lot more going on in my life around this time, and so I was still playing RPGs, but maybe I was a little more limited, and just Super Mario RPG coming out at the same time was enough to fill that part of my life, and I wasn't burning through it and then also looking for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I wonder if that's part of the reason why some of these games fell through the cracks for kind of people our age.
Yeah, and I would love to go back and hit myself in the head, because there's one, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was like it was like a guitar RPG. There was like a loot mechanic where like there was no Guitar Hero controller.
Guitar Man?
But I was like, huh?
Not Guitar Man, that was a PS2 game. Huh.
No, but it was literally like an RPG, but then you had play along moments, like you whipped out your guitar sword, and then there was like just like Guitar Hero, you're supposed to be hitting buttons at certain times, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, I love this concept. And it was just absolute dog shit in every way. It's massive loading time, anime style graphics that were terrible, like polygons. I've been looking through trying to find, it's like I was so desperate for like what is the next cool thing on PlayStation that I was just swinging and missing on all these, not even looking at all these great 16-bit RPGs.
Sorry if my keys are clacking. I'm trying to figure out what game you're talking about. This does not ring any bells for me. So that was a deep cut. Pandemonium? No. Gosh.
It's not Grandia, but it has a similar, it might end in A in that way.
Huh.
It did end with an A. It was called Ephemeral Fantasia, and it was hot dog shit. It was for the PS2, which is why neither Aiden nor I could remember it or look it up quickly on air. It did use the Guitar Freaks controller, if you happened to have one. And once again, I want to emphasize, it sucked ass.
But let's carry on. Let's bring it home.
Yeah.
Wait, no, not bring it home. Sorry, that is an awful conservative slogan from the recent election. Let's review the review. Ty, let's look at this. What did you think? Did they get it right from the perspective, you don't know Lufia too well, but what did you take away as a non-fan from today's reviews?
Yeah, well, it certainly made the case for this is a game worth playing, right? I want to hear more about the story because I think that was, for me, a huge driver of loving RPGs, right? Was this is a game that has an actual story. It has narrative. It has characters. It has a setting. It has a world. And it's putting me into that world and I'm playing that role. Whether it's a silent protagonist or I'm just controlling, the main character of an actual vibrant cast of characters. So I didn't get much of a sense of the story.
Yeah.
And they did praise the story, I think, in at least one of the capsule reviews.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that's the only piece that's missing. They do a great job talking about the graphics, and they talk a lot about how much it's improved from Lufia 1. And just as we've been talking, I went back and looked at Lufia 1. I'm like, show me these, hilariously cheap looking battle sequences. And yeah, absolutely. The battles in Lufia 1, they just have sprites of characters, these sprites of enemies just overlaid on top of graphics of rooms, but not even in a perspective where it looks like the character is in the room. It's just on top of the room.
It's like it's a throwback to some of the old like Dragon Quest games.
Yeah,
that battle system. But by the time of Final Fantasy IV or Lufia 1 came out pretty early on the Super Nintendo, and so it still like felt like an NES game almost. Whereas Lufia 2 was like deeply into the 16-bit kind of ethos at that point. And to touch on the story, honestly, the story in Lufia 2 is not very good. Like, if you're looking at Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger, Phantasy Star 4, Lufia 2 is very much in that traditional structure of like town, dungeon, right? You get to a town, there's a conflict, you go to the dungeon, you resolve the conflict, you move on to the next town until you make your way around the world, and then you fight the Sinistrals. There are some character moments, there's some interesting relationship dynamics within the party between Maxim and some of the other characters and stuff. Early on in the game, he has this like romance with Tia, who's from his hometown, and she sort of like leaves eventually, and he finds somebody else that is like, so there's like some complexity there, but it's honestly not. When you look at something like Final Fantasy VI from around the same time, even a couple of years earlier, you saw a lot of like breaking down of that traditional like town dungeon structure, and having more set piece design, having more sort of like momentum based storytelling, and none of that is in Lufia 2. And I think it does enough to propel you forward, but it's absolutely the type of game where the plot is sort of a contrivance for exploring the world in these puzzle based dungeons and stuff. So I'm not surprised it doesn't get full like rate in the reviews, because I honestly think if you dug into it too much, even in 1996, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's fairly simple. The translation's not very good, but it does the job.
So yeah, overall, I want to give it scoring credit for not having a score, for having like a pure editorial review, especially since this reviewer also gave us a score earlier in the magazine. That's unique and cool, and I think way ahead of its time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, that's basically where like I'm coming down to as well, is I love the idea of the capsule reviews that are a little more buyer's guidey, and then like this bigger deep dive into what really makes the game look good and isn't trying to convince you. It's like, it's glowing, but it's not trying to convince you why this is the one that needs your money this month. It wants to take a look at contextually, how does it fit in with the first game? How does it fit in with other games of the time? Where is it drawing, it makes comparisons to where its soundtrack is touching on what Final Fantasy is doing at the time, or it looks to Chrono Trigger. How is it, taking ideas from Chrono Trigger with on-world enemy sprites? So it's trying to contextualize a bit more than what you're seeing from other buyer's guide style, consumer style reviews in other magazines, coupled with the, the capsule reviews, which were really good. What would you give it out of, on a rating scale? What are we looking at for this one?
Ooh, okay. Yeah, I am gonna give GameFan's review of Lufia 2 7.5 out of 10 giant catfish.
7.5 out of 10 giant catfish. I think that's good. I would give it slightly higher. I would give it, Orion's long review, along with the capsule reviews, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. I think it's actually like, or 8 giant catfish out of 10, because I think it's a pretty good review. I think it really understands what the game is and succeeds as, and it sells it in many different ways throughout the capsule reviews and the long review. I am docking it a mark though, and I'm doing the thing I hate where I'm ending on a negative for something I generally really like, but I'm going to dock it a point. So I probably would have given it a 9 because I think it's a really solid collection of reviews. Docking it a point because so many of them spent so much of their review just talking about how we never get RPGs instead of talking about, hey, we got this RPG. We're lucky. Here's why it's so good. Or here's why you need to play it, or why it's special. And so the fact that like so many of the reviews ended up spending half their word count on like, oh my gosh, it's an RPG. Can you believe it? It's in English. Isn't very helpful, in terms of, that consumer style review. Whereas like the same number of words are spent in Orion's long form review as, the capsule reviews were spending on that exact same topic. So knocking a mark off to that. 8 giant catfish. 8 giant catfish out of 10 for me. It's a good one.
All right, and I think that's a good place to settle it, because for me, I was like, as soon as you said to the capsule reviews, I was like, I almost want to give credit for the capsule reviews too, but you're right, they do spend a lot of time just talking about this is an RPG. Oh my god, this is an RPG. Red alert, play it, no matter how good it is or isn't. And as much as that does capture the mood of a lot of RPG fans at the time, it's still not all that valid artistically, creatively as critique.
Yeah, I agree.
Are you good there?
I think, it's of its time, but I think it does the job pretty darn well, honestly.
All right, that is our review of GameFan's review of Lufia II, Rise of the Sinistrals. Did we get it right? Leave our review a review at Apple Podcasts. Post it as a comment on YouTube. We will read the best ones on air. And hey, go ahead and pass this show around to all your friends like it's 3rd grade and we're on the playground. Shout us out on Blue Sky, YouTube, TikTok, wherever at FunFactor Pod. But unlike these old magazines, you won't have to wait a whole month for your next installment. We're dropping new episodes every 2 weeks. So go to funfactorpod.com to follow our show on your podcatcher of choice, and please consider becoming a member of FunFactor Ultra, our premium tiers that unlock ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and the members-only channels of our Discord. I'm just going to scratch that. I promise you, you cannot miss it. If you sign up, you and we will have a maximum score in FunFactor.
I'm working on a magic card deck.
Oh, nice.
Cards here. Gotta trim it down by like 3 cards though. Or no, 6 cards. I'm at 106. It's tough.
Ooh. What's a commander?
Eshki, Dragon Claw. Here, I'll see if I can hold her up. She basically wants to cast like a creature and non-creature spell each turn. So I have like, I don't know if you can like see that, but
I pulled it up on
basically wants to cast like a creature and non-creature spell each turn. So then I have a bunch of like adventure cards that can be a creature or a non-creature. Cool. And then like a bunch of really cheap like cantrippy spells, like Gatling, basically like 1 mana, 0 mana cards that I can cast before I cast a creature. And I don't know how it wins, but we'll see.
Oh yeah, that's like all my decks.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Cool, I got this really cool theme, and it's all synergy.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely a synergy value deck. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Eshki can like get really big really fast, and I could win through commander damage. Like she has trample, ward 1, and vigilance, and then gets 2 +1/+1 counters on her every time I cast like a creature and a non-creature spell in that turn. So like theoretically she could get huge and commander damage people out, but keeping her alive is tricky. So we'll see. It's mostly
Makes
just like
sense.
a silly, sometimes I like to just build like weird decks that let me use like a bunch of cards in my bulk bin that I like would never touch otherwise.
Yeah, I've been building Obeka
Oh yeah.
Obeka deck, and I realized partly because my two main decks are Dimir Fairy deck, as a precon that I upgraded, the Faded Minion one.
It's a great precon.
And then also this Rakdos clerics, like black clerics and phoenixes deck that was like, because I like phoenixes,
Yeah.
And so
Totally.
I've bought so many cards for both of them and, swapped in and out and cut cards. I'm like, wait a minute, Obeka is blue, black, red. So I've got a ton of blue, black, red, and various combinations. So like, okay, cool. I'll just, so I threw a bunch in, and now I'm like buying actual like on theme or like mechanically relevant cards, making it more and more actually functional. But it was surprisingly okay with just the stuff I had laying around.
Yeah, it's fun. Like, I mean, that's what's great about Commander. It's like you can kind of whip something together. Like even for this deck, I only had to buy like a fairly small number of cards from the shop because it was like I just dug through my bin for a whole bunch of random commons and uncommons, and worked really well.
Cool. All right, well, let's get back at it because we got to plow through a whole nother episode yet.
Yes, we do. Let's do it.
Lufia II. Okay, I just realized you slow rolled this, and I actually didn't scroll down to see what the game was. Do you want me to not mention it? Do you want me to keep it a surprise?
Oh no, I think you can mention it now. That's all good. I don't know why I slow roll it when it's like literally the episode title. I just think it's kind of funny to slow roll it.
I do. Yeah, and like back when I was initially like thinking we could have it be like a surprise to each other, I still thought that would work. So
people seem to care more about what game we're reviewing than I kind of expected.
I'm
so I think
surprised.
I don't think
I'm so surprised how much that is.
Yeah. So, which almost made me pick Super Mario RPG for this episode, but I wanted to do Lufia instead. But I talked earlier about how like these magazines really let us feel like we experienced or knew about or were in on games, like even if we didn't get to order them or play them. And these
100%.
like these previews and these like ads at the back, they're a huge part of that for me. Like I looked at these screenshots for like so long and just dreamed about having these games.